Hello my friends and welcome to a new video. So I recently saw this brilliant upload by Annie Austin where he counts the number of trees in Skyrim, and it got me thinking, would it be possible to do something similar in Subnautica? Granted, there aren't that many trees in the game, but there are certainly quite a few fish. How many? Well, I have no clue. Let's see if we can find out. But how does one even go about something like this? I could just jump into the water and start counting, but how on earth would I possibly keep track? And wait just a second, what even is a fish? This seems like a fish. Yeah, this is probably a fish too. I will need to do some research first. According to Wikipedia, fish are, quote, aquatic, anemniotic, gill-bearing vertebrate animals with swimming fins and a hard skull, but lacking limbs with digits. In more plain English, this basically means an animal that lives in the water, has a specific type of egg, breathes using gills, it has a backbone or a spine, propels itself using fins, and has no limbs for grabbing. At least, that's my understanding. But I know exactly what you're thinking. Bacon, you're a YouTuber and a game developer. Your understanding of biological definitions is not exactly credible. And to that I say, touché. That's why I asked somebody who would know a lot better for help. I reached out to Maria from Sea and Me, who is a marine biologist out there in the field right now doing research. I emailed her with 3 questions. How would you define what a fish is? Out of the Subnautica fauna, which would qualify as fish by real-life standards? And finally, how would you estimate the total fish population in Subnautica? And I was lucky enough that she responded with a very nice and detailed answer for each of these questions, so thank you so much. Now I'm going to put the full answers on the screen if you want to pause and read them, but I'll kind of just give you the breakdown. For defining what a fish is, it appears that our definition is mostly right. She does, however, also outline the kind of difficulty of defining what a fish is scientifically, since they aren't necessarily confined to one branch of the evolutionary tree. For which Subnautica fish would qualify, it is relatively simple as well. Anything that kind of looks like a fish should be a fish, nothing crazy that doesn't fit the first question, like most of the leviathans for instance. And finally, for the last question, she recommends kind of looking into the methods that real-life marine biologists use, such as for example, sampling some biomes, or trying to understand how many fish the ecosystem could support. Linking this back to Subnautica, while we don't exactly know the internal organ structure of these animals, assuming that most function like how fish do on Earth, there are some we can certainly eliminate from our count today. Due to having limbs or the ability to grasp prey, we can cut reapers, crab snakes, crab squids, sea treaders, warpers, sea dragons, sea emperors, and lava lizards. Floaters, amoeboids, crawlers, lava larvae, and bleeders are more akin to mollusks or arthropods. Also, the jelly ray seems to be a non-vertebrate, so that wouldn't count either. And finally, for gasopods, look, I have no clue, but it doesn't look like they use gills, so we'll just exclude them and call it a day. Alright, so we've established what creatures probably count as fish, but how can we go about counting them? I mean, even with these taken off the list, there are still like, what, 31 species to go through? I think a good place to start might be the methods that real-world scientists use to estimate fish populations in our oceans. As you might have guessed, they aren't exactly diving into the water with a pair of fins and a calculator. There are several ways of varying accuracy that can be used to get a gauge of how many fish of a species there are. The mark and recapture method is perhaps the most well-known one, and its application is fairly simple. Scientists will capture fish of a certain species, mark them, and then release them back into the wild. Then they do a recapture where they yet again grab fish of said species and see how many are already marked. If they recapture many that were marked, that means the population is probably fairly low, whereas if they capture many that had no marks, that probably means the population is fairly high. For specific numbers, they use something called the Lincoln-Peterson estimator, and look, I'm not gonna bore you with the details here. Bottom line is, this won't really work for us. Even in the real world, this method can be unreliable since it makes several assumptions, such as that the tags didn't fall off or that there was no major population boom or decrease between the two captures. More pertinently, however, there is no way for us to mark fish in Subnautica. I could try attaching floaters to them, but not only would that probably be virtual animal cruelty, but also Subnautica fish despawn when you leave the area, so this method is a no-go. Now, for a method that might yield at least some results, we should look at volumetric sampling. The idea here is quite simple. First, we'll need to know the total volume of water that we're working with. Then we pick several spots in said volume, the more the better, and count the fish we can see around us in a certain radius. Finally, we can extrapolate this data to the entirety of the water volume of the game, and we have an estimate of how many fish there are. And for this segment, I want to give a massive shout out to Rocket Soup, whose maps were incredibly useful for measurements. I'll leave a link to his blog post in the description. So, what did I do? Well, this is the Subnautica map. The first rule of business is figuring out how much total volume of water there is, and this isn't easy. To kick off, I needed to do a lot of measuring. By placing 2 beacons, you can establish that the aurora is approximately 1,200 meters in length. Extrapolating this onto the map, we can see that the crater is, give or take, 3,600 by 3,600 meters. Further using these measurements, you can see here we get a total surface area of the map to very roughly 15,952,500 meters square, or rounded up to 16 kilometers squared. Taking additional measurements from this depth map lets me establish a very rough estimate for how much surface area each of these depth brackets consists of. Taking the average depth of the region as the number in the middle of the bracket, I could then calculate how much total water volume there is on, let's say, the surface portion of the map. I then went down into the cave systems, where I took multiple measurements to establish how tall or deep the caverns are. I then averaged out that depth across the calculated surface area, which gave me a rough estimate of their volume. Finally, we can add all of these numbers together to get the grand total volume of water in the Subnautica map, excluding the void, to around 3,235,320,000,000 liters of water. Yeah, okay, that's an insane number. But how much is that really? Well, it's about 3.2 cubic kilometers, or give or take 1,294,128 Olympic swimming pools. Right, so that was the easier part. Now on to counting fish. To do this, I knew the larger and more varied the sample, the more accurate results I could expect. I then built this approximately 55 by 55 by 20 meter large structure that I then replicated into every major biome in the game. Yeah, that took a while. This would give me a standardized format for counting fish within a set volume of water. The strategy was simple. I would let the game play for a bit so the fish could freely swim around. Then I would set the speed to 0, enable FreeCam, and count how many fish were within the confines of the structure. I would do this in every biome while keeping track of the numbers. Now, counting fish isn't really that hard until you get to the schools of fish. Yeah, I counted those too. All of them.
And me.
And to make things even more difficult, I repeated each measurement 3 times, measuring twice within the structure and 1 time above the surface, projecting a similarly shaped container. The reason I did this 3rd measurement is that in Subnautica, more often than not, there are vastly more fish near the seabed than just freely swimming around. I figured this would keep the data at least a little cleaner and not biased, since most of my buildings were practically right up against the bottom. And then finally, the numbers were in. So, to give a bit of context, I measured in 18 biomes within structures of 60,500 cubic meters. This came to a total of 1,089,000 cubic meters measured. Now that might sound impressive, but in reality, nearly 3,000 of these could fit into the map. On average, there were around 26.6 fish per structure I measured, which finally brings us to the resulting estimate. Extrapolating these numbers to the entirety of the water volume of the map finally gives us an estimate of the fish, which is, drumroll please, 79,169 fish in the map. Now that is a number, but frankly it feels like a crazy wild guess to me. To paint the picture, all of my measurements in total barely come to 0.1% of the water volume in the map, and fish distribution in these biomes tends to fluctuate so wildly that I would struggle to call this in any way accurate. But what now? Is there a way we could get an estimate that is actually somewhat accurate? Well, to do that, I knew I needed help. And so I reached out to the one person who might just be able to get us something.
Hi, my name is Brad, and I make YouTube videos where I learn how games work and then break them with code. And the last bacon asked me to help figure out how many fish are in Subnautica. So how do we count all the fish in the game? Well, we could just make a grab trap super powerful. Okay, oh boy, now it's grabbing everything in the world! Oh my gosh, it's too powerful! But I don't think that's gonna give us very accurate results. I tried looking at every object that has certain creature components, which includes all of these. But this brings us to the biggest difficulty with this challenge. To improve performance, only objects near the camera are loaded in Subnautica, which is pretty common in video games. So if we just count all the current creature components, we'll just get what's loaded around us, which is way less than there are in the entire game world. Okay, so maybe we just have to move the camera around and count as we go. How long could that take? Well, if we take the naive approach and estimate the size of the Subnautica map by assuming it's a cube, it's about 5,000 by 5,000 by 2,000 meters, which is 50 billion cubic meters. Okay, well the map is split up into cells, which are 8 meters on all sides, so what? That's only over 97 million cells. I tried warping to every cell that loads in, since we know they won't be empty space. Let that run for 18 hours, but I don't think it was very reliable, and I didn't even know how close it was to finishing, since I didn't know how many cells there were in the game. I also tried swimming around manually, thinking maybe I could do it faster, and having the code count how many fish were in each cell every time it was loaded. But because I'm moving around and the fish are moving around, that definitely overcounted. Like, it counted 6 sea dragons, and there are definitely only 3 in the game. If I was gonna figure this out, I was really going to have to learn how this game's creature spawning works. And one very important thing I learned about was entity spawners. These invisible little objects have a chance to spawn loot and creatures when they load in. I wanted to see where and how many there are, so I drew little boxes around them, pink for creatures and green for loot. So many, just thousands and thousands everywhere. These things spawn stuff in based on probabilities. So we can do stuff like raise the probability to 100% and get the most spawns possible. That looks like a lot more fish. Limestone, limestone, limestone. Like basically anywhere there can be a resource, there's a resource. Oh, it's covered in salt. You see all this? They're still spawning in. There's so many. Look at all this. There's so, oh my gosh. Or set it to 0% and get no spawns. Or tell it to always spawn peepers. Yep, that's a lot of peepers. You know what? I think there's not gonna be any resources in the game. Yep, there's nothing, there's no resources because it's all been turned into peepers. Or mini auroras. Oh, that is ridiculous. There's no fish on this planet anymore. These are what I really needed to count. So I swam around counting these up and running their spawn function to see what it returned. There were so many, and I stopped after I got to around 102,000 cells. I also noticed the longer I would hang around an area, the more boxes would spawn in. So while this was my best attempt yet, I knew it could be more accurate. Then I thought, what if we read the game files themselves? So I spent hours learning how the game loads the world in chunks. Finally, I had some code that would load in all 1,606 chunk files, extract all 106,437 cells, and simulate a spawn for all 740,923 creature spawners. I ran it 10 times and averaged the numbers. The numbers won't be exact because it changes. Fish are dying, eggs are hatching, and there's random number generation involved. And throwing in some creatures that don't spawn in cells the same way, like crab snakes, reefbacks and reefback babies, sea treaders, and adding in 25 Reaper Leviathans, 3 sea dragons, a max of 3 Void Ghost Leviathans at a time, the Ghost Leviathan Juvenile, and the Sea Emperor herself, gives us a total of 89,158.6 creatures. But wait, schools of fish? This isn't just one fish, and they make up most of what spawns. Well, after looking at the generation code and actually counting in game, they average 100 fish per school, meaning our new total number of creatures in Subnautica is 1,558,991.8, 95% of which is just schools of little fish. I'm sure with more time, I could get even more accurate results, and I may have missed things, and I probably made mistakes somewhere. But for now, that's my best estimate. Which of those creatures count as fish? I don't know. I'm gonna go lie down.
Well, Brad, I have to say that was absolutely incredible. And luckily, we do know which creatures count as fish and which don't. Adding up those numbers gives us the final estimate at 1,556,089.6. So there you have it, folks. That's the final number, and that brings us toward the end of the video. A huge shout out to both Brad and Maria. Thank you guys so much for helping me pull this off. Their channels are down in the description, guys. Make sure to go check them out and show them some love. And a massive amount of love to all of our amazing members as well. Krayinda, Sander Weinholz, Kronos, Silver Soul, Master Ugwe, OG Burner, Yusuf Ismail Tatar, Musical Soul, MR, Philip Svoboda, E. Michael, Shitsu, Callum Whaley, Julian, Esteva Omelo, Proximity, Lawrence Matthews, Cody the Bumboy, Goodly Boy, and Tree4646 Gaming. Thank you guys so much for the support. It means the world to me. If you liked the video, maybe consider leaving a like, commenting, or subscribing. All those would be very much appreciated. And with that, I'm going to wish you all a beautiful rest of the day, and I'll see you in whatever next video I make. Bye bye!